say thank you to Pastor David for showing up for work this morning. And thank all of you for showing up for work this morning. Because I am here to talk about work this morning. Your work and my work and our work together. I'm here to talk this morning about the work we choose and the work that chooses us. The work God chooses for us sometimes, whether we like it or not. And the work we have to do and the work we want to do, that's all work. Anita was working for us this morning. And I have to ask you a favor. Since some people seem to be taking this Labor Day weekend kind of seriously and they didn't show up for work this morning, your work, especially on this side of the sanctuary this morning, is to help me and be extra loud, okay? Can you do that for me? That's your work. Our country in trouble today, as Reverend Marlon named, had two important anniversaries last week. Wednesday was the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King Jr. delivering his I Have a Dream speech in our nation's capital. And if you happened to be skipping out on work last week and missed Reverend Davis's sermon, you can still go online on YouTube and watch that. People have been telling me about it and talking about it all week. You don't want to miss it. And this past Wednesday was also the 8th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. So I want to start this morning by telling you a story about that city, a story about a man who went to that city with his church's youth group about a year after the hurricane blew through. The city was still in terrible shape, a city that is known for celebrating, had sunk deep into a depression, an economic and a psychological and a spiritual slump. People still in the city wondered if there was a way forward. And people who had fled the city wondered if they would ever find a way back into this broken world. 10 adults and 20 teenagers came to volunteer any way they could. They hauled away wreckage. The man found himself in conversation one day on the street with a local homeowner who was out working a second job. One of those people working a second job or a third job with one of the city's crews, picking up the leftover piles of people's lives that were left on the street. His house was still standing, but it was unlivable. He'd lost his job as a cook because the restaurant he'd worked in had been flooded. And he and his wife and their 2 girls had moved into a FEMA trailer in his mother-in-law's front yard. The man from away listened to the man from the sad city. And he listened to him in a way that we sometimes forget to listen to each other. He didn't just hear the words, but he felt the words in his heart. He was also the father of 2 girls, and so we thought about how easily he could find himself in the same situation. The next day, the volunteer church crew moved indoors and started hauling stuff out and dumping on the sidewalks for other crews to collect, and the work was physically demanding and emotionally draining. Framed photographs of families at weddings and graduations, torn diplomas, moldy stuffed animals piled up with broken appliances and wrecked furniture, exposing the fragility of our lives here together. And day after day, in response, church groups from across the country arrived in that city. As the local and federal governments fumbled, the people, mostly from faith communities like ours, showed up and got to work. And the man thought, anyone can break things down, haul stuff out and throw it on the sidewalks, but who's going to rebuild these houses so that my new friend and others like him will have homes to live in? And the more he thought about it that week, the more he thought he could do something about it. That work or life or God was presenting him with something more than the job he had come there to do. And what started out as a week-long service trip turned into a life-changing Saul on the road to Damascus. Remember Saul, who becomes Paul? kind of moment. The early Christians who spoke Greek, we're going to use a little Greek this morning, called it a metanoia, a turning around, a shift or a transformation of consciousness. And from that moment on, the man worked hard to develop and direct a new nonprofit that brought volunteers into the lower Ninth Ward, the most severely hit neighborhood, to rebuild homes and lives. I was thinking about this man partly because it's Labor Day weekend, and it seemed like a good time to think about the work we choose and the work that chooses us as we lift up our president doing his work, difficult work, and to reflect on the difference between our jobs and our work with a capital W, between our livelihoods and what we choose to be our real work in the world. Even though it is a bit of a paradox this weekend, we give people time off of work in order to honor the value of their work. And I don't know really if before this morning you thought of coming to church as your work. Probably not. Which is, I do. Well, yeah, some of us do. That's true. Raise your hand. It's probably a good thing you don't, because most of us think of work as a thing we have to do. We do preach that sometimes. And church is the thing we want to do. One's compulsory, right? And the other is voluntary. But the thing is, and here's a little more Greek, the word liturgy, and this is an outline of the liturgy that you have here in your hands, comes from another Greek word, liturgia, which means, get this, the work of the people. Liturgia is the work of the people. So I am working right now, even though I'm dressed a little differently than I used to be for most of my jobs I had before this moment, but I can't do my work without you and you and you and you. We can't do this work without each other. Worship, the work of landing on and lifting up what is most worthy, is something we discover together, which is why that word liturgia, liturgy, is such a good reminder. It's the work of the people. And maybe it's because I didn't take a conventional path to my own career. Some of you know, others don't, that I was ordained to the ministry at 48. I pay attention to people who are looking for work that is real. People who are looking for the work that might be choosing them. People who are looking for signs that lead to work in the world that's about daily meaning and not just daily bread. About daily meaning, not just daily bread. Thank you, Sister Carmen. And there are several members of this church who've come to me recently because they're getting closer to their retirement and they wonder what their lives will be about on the other side of their careers. Right? If I'm not earning money every day through my labor, who am I? It's an ancient question. What meaning do our lives have beyond what we produce? The traditional question for women has been beyond our children, and for men, beyond the money we earn or the service we offer through the military. And when our jobs don't reflect our callings, as they don't for many of us, and most of us can't pick up and move to New Orleans and start a nonprofit, right? How do we determine the worth of the lives we're living right now? I was thinking about this, getting ready for today, and I heard something on the news that offered me a new perspective. Did you hear about the school shooting last week in the middle of all that other news? The one in Georgia? The one that didn't happen? Some of you heard, some of you didn't. For those of you who missed it, here's the bare bones of what happened. A 20-year-old man slipped into a packed elementary school carrying an automatic rifle and a bag of ammunition. They say now that he probably had 500 rounds of ammunition with him. Somehow he slipped into the front office where there were office workers going about their business, doing their jobs, right? I was actually at the YWCA doing my workout, another kind of work, and watching on the television screens as I saw this unfold before me, and you hear the audio recordings of a woman's voice who's in the office, and she says, he's firing his gun. I've got to get out of here. And the police, you hear the voice of the police dispatcher on the other side of the line who says immediately, can you get someplace safe? And I'm thinking, yes, good, smart, get away from the guy with a gun, get out of there. And there's a long silence, and if you can see the videotape, you see outside police cars coming and people moving on the streets outside the school. And then you hear Antoinette Tuff's voice again. She's the woman on the tape, and that is her real name. You hear Antoinette Tuff say again, he says he's willing to kill, and he has nothing to live for. And slowly, it sunk into me, this woman is not going anywhere. She's stuck in the school office with a man carrying a loaded weapon that he's already fired. Forget about being willing to fire. She just showed up for work. And somebody, God, if you believe in God, is asking her to do something bigger. And then you hear her voice again, and she says, it's amazing. She says, it's going to be all right, sweetie. I just want you to know I love you, okay? And she's talking to the man with the gun. I leaned in to make sure like this wasn't a hoax or something, you know? But no, she's talking to the police dispatcher and telling this woman what to tell the captain of an entire police force of armed men who are moving all around the school, taking their positions and ready to fire. And she keeps up this calm conversation with this man in the elementary school office. And she says, that's a good thing that you're just giving up. Don't worry about it. We all go through something in life. I'm proud of you. She, Antoinette Tuff, is moving way beyond her responsibilities as a bookkeeper or her obligations as an employee. She goes on, she shows up as a full human being in all her power and glory. And she goes on and tells him that she's been down before too. And she's picked herself up, and he can too. She doesn't see any difference between herself and this man with a gun and a bag of ammunition. I thought the same thing, she says. I even tried to commit suicide last year after my husband left me. But look at me now. I'm still working, and everything's okay. She even offered to walk outside with the man to surrender so the police wouldn't shoot at him. It's unbelievable, right? And it's true. It's real. One headline I read said the only thing that can stop a bad guy with a gun is a good woman with a heart. And I got to tell you, I know some good women with some good hearts sitting right out here. I do. It's amazing. She was calm and courageous, right? Calm and courageous. But it's the third thing she did that I think has really grabbed the nation's attention, including our president's attention, who called to thank her last week and has invited her to the White House to congratulate and thank her. Antoinette was incredibly human in the best sense of the word and incredibly compassionate, and she did that healing work we were just singing about together because of how she could show up, because of how she did show up. And I say it's incredible because under that kind of pressure, right, it's hard to believe there's a time or any reason, right? No time, no reason to care or show love when people's lives are at risk. Or is it the other way around, right? And even though she was scared to death, right, she just showed up to do her job as a bookkeeper in the elementary school. She showed up as a whole human being, willing and ready to do a lot more than her job. She came ready to do her work as a human being, as a part of this community, right? Someone who's trying to build this kingdom of heaven on earth. And because of Antoinette, no one, no child, no adult, no one was hurt or shot or killed on that day. That kingdom of heaven, this thinking about the man in New Orleans and Antoinette tough in that office, led me to that parable that Marlon shared with us earlier and challenged me to interpret for you. So what is the real work of our lives? What's the difference? What's the meaning? What's the significance of the difference between the work we choose and the work that chooses us? I went back and I read that passage. It's chapter 20, Gospel of Matthew. The workers show up last, right? At the very end of the day, they get paid as much as the workers who show up at the beginning of the day. It doesn't make any sense at all, right? It seems like the opposite of any kind of kingdom or society or community I would want to belong to. Unjust labor practices, I'm ready to shout out. We had our first ever inaugural social justice retreat yesterday here in this church, and if any of my team leaders are out there listening to me now, they're thinking, yes, Barbara, unjust labor practices. What kind of regulations do you have in that Holy Land vineyard? And what are you thinking, Jesus? We'd be right in asking those kind of questions. But one interesting way to work a parable is to put yourself in the place of the various characters in the story. And so I did that. And I wonder, when you heard the story just a little while ago, did you see yourself as the workers who showed up early? Did you see yourself as the workers who showed up late? Or did you see yourself as the landowner who was paying the workers at the end of the day? Because it makes a difference. It matters where you see yourself in the story. If you're the worker who shows up early in the morning, you might very well be one of those who grumbled at the landowner later on in the day. These last kind of slouchers, they worked only for an hour, and you've made them equal to us, we who've borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat. What is up with that? But if you see yourself as one of those workers who showed up late in the afternoon, or even maybe just an hour before quitting time, you're probably not complaining, are you? Instead, you might be feeling grateful, lucky, blessed, ready to return to work the next day. And what if you see yourself as the landowner? What if you see yourself as the boss? Here you are, you're offering an incentive to your new employees, or you're simply being generous, as he says in the scripture, and now you're getting flack from some workers who are complaining that some are getting paid more than their fair share of the wages. You may be thinking which workers are worth keeping on that vineyard crew, and which ones aren't really worth the trouble. You with me? Still, I'm not going to ask for show of hands, but most people identify with the indignant workers. How many of you did? Raise your hands, show me. How many people were those workers who showed up first thing in the morning and feel like they didn't get there? I see my own daughter raising her hand. That's good. Honest. We don't want to work for some guy who doesn't recognize our individual work. A boss who's going to pretend we're all in this together. It's not fair. And in the real world, we're not in this all together. I deserve what I'm owed, and I want what I'm due. Right? But as hard as we work for justice and have a right or even an obligation to fight for fair wages, and we do, don't get me wrong, it's also true, though, that the early Christian communities were as successful as they were because of the way they treated each other within the community. If you became a Christian, it meant that you were cared for. Your mother, when she became a widow, was cared for. When you were sick, someone would come and care for you. If you weren't strong enough to care for them, your children would be cared for by others. It was, and it still is today, if you think about it, a radical way of being in community. Even here in Oklahoma, where so many people profess to be true Christians. Are you with me? Well. There's work in the world, and there's work in the vineyard. And I have that Unitarian man in New Orleans who turns up for his job and his life turns upside down to the work he feels called to do. And Antoinette on my mind. Antoinette who shows us that compassion can overcome conflict and that vulnerability can overcome violence. And that the way we're taught the world has to work isn't always the way the world goes. That we might just be showing up for a job as a bookkeeper or for our hours of labor in whatever vineyard we work in. Or we might not even be working anymore, but there is always work to be done. Good work, solid work for which we are hardly ever paid. It's what the disgruntled workers and what I'm putting myself there with those disgruntled workers and those of you who raised your hands, often lose sight of. It's what Jesus and Matthew are reminding us of. We labor, and the work of the world is as common as mud, but there's always the thing worth doing well right in front of our eyes. The work of discovering together what is possible in the name of love. Our liturgy, even in a devastated city, even in a vineyard, or even in an elementary school office. There's always the work of landing on and lifting up what's most holy, no matter who we are, and not just on Sunday mornings when we worship together. And once I was able to step out of my own self-righteous, justice-seeking shoes, and it took some effort, I gotta tell you, it took some effort to move over here, I could hear the parable in a new way, and as a reminder that justice, that what's good and true and right, doesn't always, and it won't always work out to my advantage. And it may not look the way I think it should look at all, because it's bigger than that, right? It's bigger than me. So what I haven't told you, and what some of you don't know, is that man who went to New Orleans as a chaperone on a church youth trip is my husband. That didn't feel like justice to me. Because his metanoia, or that road to Damascus experience, sounds all noble and good in the abstract. Got that? Somebody else can go do that good work for the Lord. But honey, you're staying home with me, helping me raise these kids, right? It was all good in the abstract, but it was anything but easy on our family and on our marriage. I'm telling you, it was hard. Because justice, what is good and true and real, doesn't always work out to our advantage. And it often doesn't look the way we think it should when we're just looking through our own eyes. I've always felt indignant on behalf of those workers who were wronged. But then again, what is wrong with creating a society or a church in which everyone's needs are provided for, no matter what they're able to contribute? Isn't that what we're all about here? Is Jesus trying to tell us that there's always good work for each and every one of us, no matter who we are, no matter what our limitations are, no matter how old or young we are, no matter where we find ourselves in our lives, no matter how little money we have to give, no matter how others attack or antagonize us, we each have important, life-changing, world-changing work to do. Because in that vineyard, my nephew who has severe disabilities would be cared for, and his gifts would be appreciated and rewarded, right? In this vineyard that we're creating together here. And the church member who can't work because of a mental illness would not feel marginalized, right? She'd be welcomed and put to work here in this community, in this vineyard. And my friend Caleb, who has Down syndrome, he would have a place and a purpose in our vineyard, in our church community. And our elders, some of us who can, all we can do is show up. I'm getting closer and closer every day. That is a form of work. And our elders would be honored and revered for what they contribute, which is their presence. Because in the vineyard, in that kingdom of heaven, our real work is harnessing ourselves to the task of becoming fully human, which is what Antoinette modeled for us. Our task is to become fully human and recognize each other as fully divine. It's what Jesus wanted us to do. So yesterday, I want to tell you a little more about this first social justice retreat we had here at All Souls. I was very amazed that 20 people showed up on a holiday weekend to talk about this work of tending to the vineyard and creating the kingdom together. We even ate grapes together. And we talked about what some members have been talking about with me for years, a kind of internal work exchange or barter system we could set up within our own faith community. Let's say, for example, if you could offer 2 hours of childcare, you might exchange that with someone else who could offer 2 hours of house painting. Or another example, let's see, if I could offer 2 hours of IT expertise, which I can't, so don't get any ideas. Wish I could, but I can't. I might exchange that with you for 2 hours of yard work or childcare. Work that's valued one way out there on the market could be valued very differently in here within our faith community. We can cultivate our own vineyard and follow in his footsteps. So I have 2 requests for you this morning. I have two things I want to ask you this morning. The first is, if this intrigues you, this work of farming, cultivating our own vineyard, if it speaks to you, then speak to me, okay? And the second thing is, if you're unhappy in your job, or unhappy because you don't have a job, keep a work diary this week. Not a job diary, but a work, capital W-O-R-K, a work diary, your work in the world diary. Harvard Business School professor Teresa Amabile recommends spending about 10 minutes each day reflecting and recording the challenges we faced and the successes we've had on or off the job. Her research shows that this practice, which intentionally blurs the boundary between work and spirituality, helps enhance our creativity and our motivation. After a week, if you continue this practice, you may stick with it even longer. You just might find yourself looking for a job you never imagined. You might, it's unlikely, but you might find yourself moving to a new city to start a nonprofit. I'm speaking from experience here. You might find yourself going back to school, or you might find yourself making peace with things just the way they are. It's all good, because it doesn't matter if you're working for the post office or for the president, or if you're working for a car wash or for the Congress. All our jobs are important. If you're unemployed, you still have work to do. If you're retired, you have important work to do. You have the work of your life to do. We're the ones who decide what the real work is. There's the work we do, and there's the work we are. There's the work we choose, and the work that chooses us. There's the vineyard we're in, right here, right now, together, where our work is our love made visible. And we are always a work in progress. In fact, we are God's work in progress. So let's get to it. Amen.